I uncovered my wife's affair, hired a PI, and vanished without a trace before she came home. It all started when my wife, Emily, signed up for a creative writing workshop. She'd always been passionate about literature, and I encouraged her to pursue her interests. At first, it was an innocent hobby, something she enjoyed to unwind after work. I was genuinely thrilled that she'd found something she was passionate about. Little did I know, though, that this simple interest would end up leading me down a dark path, one where I'd uncover secrets I never imagined and find myself on the brink of a betrayal I didn't see coming. For the first few weeks, she was enthusiastic. She'd come home and tell me about the stories they discussed, the writing exercises they practiced, and the interesting people she'd met. I could see her excitement, her eyes lighting up as she described it all, and for a while, I thought it was great. I was happy for her, happy she'd found a place to nurture her creativity and meet new people who shared her interests. But slowly, I began to notice changes in her. They were subtle at first, barely noticeable until they weren't. She started coming home later and later after her workshop, with vague excuses for why she'd stayed longer. She'd spend hours on her phone, typing away with this small, secretive smile on her face. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd brush it off, saying it was a friend from the workshop, nothing more. But her answers grew vaguer over time. Her texts seemed endless, and her once brief workshop nights stretched longer than they used to. Something was wrong, and it gnawed at me, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was nothing, just paranoia. But one night, after she left for another workshop session that would go late, I found myself drawn to her office. She rarely used her laptop anymore, so I figured maybe I'd find something there. A clue, an explanation, anything to ease my mind. What I found, though, was something I'll never forget. There it was, a folder buried deep in her files, labeled with a man's name I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. Inside, I found a collection of emails, messages, and intimate exchanges between her and someone from her workshop. They weren't just friendly conversations. They spoke of sneaking around, meeting in secret, and this so-called connection they had. It was more than a casual fling, it was a full-blown affair. I felt the ground shift beneath me, as though my entire world was crumbling. My hands were shaking, my head spinning, but I knew I had to keep my composure. Confronting her immediately would only lead to more lies, more excuses. If I wanted the full story, I had to be patient. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. That night, while she was still out, I hired a private investigator. I knew it was a drastic move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The next few weeks were some of the hardest I've ever endured. The PI followed her, gathering evidence photos, messages, even hotel receipts. And as it turned out, her affair wasn't confined to workshop nights. They were sneaking away during lunch breaks, meeting at hotels, sharing moments that should have been ours. Every update, every piece of evidence the PI sent felt like a knife twisting deeper. Still, I didn't let her see my pain. I carried on, acting as if nothing was wrong, letting her believe I was clueless while I quietly plotted my escape. I wasn't looking for apologies or explanations. I didn't want to sit across from her and listen to her try to justify her actions or make excuses. I wanted a clean break, so once I had gathered everything I needed, I made my move. I spent an entire day preparing while she was at work. I called in sick, packed up my essentials, and made sure all the financial loose ends were tied up. I didn't want to leave a trace, no contact, no closure, just silence. Before I left, I placed a single envelope on the kitchen counter, filled with all the evidence. I printed out every damning message, every incriminating photo, every hotel receipt. I didn't include a note. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation, the chance to try and explain herself. The truth was enough. By the time she returned home that night, I was long gone. I had vanished without a trace. My phone was off, my social media accounts deleted. I went to a friend's cabin in the mountains, a place where she wouldn't find me, completely off the grid. I imagined her walking into the empty house, seeing that envelope sitting there like a ticking bomb. I imagined the moment she opened it, the moment she realized that her secret life had come crashing down. Her betrayal was exposed, and the life she'd been juggling between two men had crumbled. As I sat in the cabin, reflecting on everything, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the peace that comes from understanding or forgiveness, but from knowing that I had taken control of the situation. I didn't have to listen to her lies, her half-hearted apologies. I didn't need closure from her because I had given myself the closure I needed. She would have to live with the guilt while I started a new chapter without her. Over the next few days, I turned my phone on briefly, only to find dozens of missed calls and messages. She'd sent frantic texts, asking where I was, begging me to come home, claiming it wasn't what it looked like. But I ignored every single one. I had no intention of responding, no desire to engage with her any further. In the end, leaving without a word was the closure I needed. She could never take back what she'd done, and I didn't need to stick around to witness the wreckage. I had disappeared from her life, just as she had disappeared from mine the moment she chose to betray me. One day, I'll move on, start fresh, and build a life without the lies and deceit that had tainted my past. For now, though, I'm content with the silence, with the peace of being free from her betrayal. Let her live with the guilt and the emptiness while I carve out a new beginning, one free from lies and free from her.